Hello, friends. Welcome to one another of our podcasts, our conversations between myself, Bhavin Shah, and our guest for today, Vihang Naik.
Hi
Welcome,
guys.
Vihang.
Hi guys.
So, so I would once again introduce Vihang to you. Vihang is a very deep spiritual seeker. He deeply believes in the power of meditation and practices it regularly. And on the other hand, he is professionally or vocationally, he is an equity analyst, deeply interested in the science of wealth creation. And today we have Vihang as our guest, and we will discuss about this very interesting topic, which I guess a lot of us have grappled with in the past and keep grappling with from time to time about making and breaking of habits, about the importance of habits in human life, and about how do we go about breaking the habits we perceive as wrong and making the habits we perceive as right. Welcome, Vihang, once again.
Hi Bhavin. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. It's a topic close to my heart and something that I have benefited immensely from. So
Yeah.
looking forward to this discussion, Bhavin.
Yes, wonderful. So I would dive straight into the topic and let me ask you a very basic question as to how is it that I have known for a bit now that you have been deeply inspired by this whole science of habits, and you have been practicing it consciously for a few months now, and you have been gung-ho about it, especially about the kind of results that you have gotten. So would you like to give our listeners a background about what is it that put you on this path of forming meaningful habits?
Sure. That's a great way to start. I always, just like everyone else, grappled with things that were very difficult for me to change. We, um, with our bodily existence for so long, we keep doing some things, and a few things, no matter how hard, no matter how relevant they are to our vocation or just in having a good life, come very difficult to most of us. And one of those things for me uh, was converting my thoughts into tangible action. So, as you would know, Bhavin, thinking is something which is very, which I'm very passionate about. However, one glitch here was, just to think and not put it in action was, I think, something that held me back. And I started reading a lot about it, and one of the great writers in this overall habit movement is James Clear, who's written this amazing book called Atomic Habits. I would recommend all our readers to browse through that book and read it, buy a copy. That's where I realized that just will is not good enough in changing our behavior. Many times, we attend seminars and we read good books, and everything that the speaker or the author says seems very convincing and interesting for us, and we get really inspired. For example, let me take example of a workout, which for me has really worked in the last few months. For example, all of us know that having a healthy body is essential for our spiritual and material existence, and workout is an integral part of this effort. Now, you would possibly read about this or hear it from the likes of Ramdev Baba or whoever, However, have full gusto and go to the gym for the first few days of the year. However, within a few days, that willpower and that enthusiasm fizzles out, and that is what. And after that, we go back to our normal behavior. What I understood was, Bhavin, that changing your habits can help you overcome those difficult changes in behavior. And we'll talk about it in greater detail in this podcast. But that's just to give you a background about how this whole habit movement started for me.
Sure, sure. Yes, good to know this. And you mentioned the point of workouts, which is when I was wondering that there is a section of people to whom working out comes very naturally, and they have been perhaps doing that for months together or years together. Whereas there is this another section of people, I belong to the second section, who find anything effortful, physically effortful, that's a huge issue. That very effort is a deal breaker. So I guess when you mention workouts, you are perhaps you mentioned that particular example because that was one thing which you were not necessarily inclined to do, but you somehow managed to do because you saw value in it. So you mentioned that, we attend a lot of seminars, read many books, but we don't end up implementing. And willpower by itself seems to be an insufficient commodity. And that is why this whole angle of habit formation is an extension of the intention that willpower lets out. So, would you like to expand upon this whole angle that in all probability workout wasn't something which you were necessarily inclined to do, but yet you managed to do because you saw value in it first, and second, you perhaps introduced a certain system which got you going.
Yeah, sure. So to give you a background, I am 30 plus, and 33 to be exact, and I haven't worked out for 15 consecutive days in all of these 33 years of my life.
Sure.
So that is how much I possibly found it difficult to work out. To just give you a background, I'm a very average physique and a very average I don't have much motivation in working out, and which is where your second point, Bhavin, came into play, that willpower is a very very finite commodity that we have. It's in a way, to give you an example, I have these, I'm sure all of us have these fights with our spouses when we are sleeping in the same bed and we are sharing a bed sheet. If you pull the bed sheet to your side, your wife's legs get exposed, and then she pulls it to her side and your tummy gets exposed.
Sure.
So willpower is that kind of a finite commodity, wherein if you pull your willpower towards your workout, possibly your diet is going to get affected. You won't have willpower for your diet. If
Yes.
if you pull it towards your diet, then maybe your work related willpower will get affected. So I have
I should
seen
say that was a brilliant example, by the way. Now I can relate to what you're telling. Yes.
yeah. So
Yes.
so and hence it is a very inefficient way of changing behavior. I read a bit into this habits thing, and the reason why habit change is so difficult and at the same time so helpful is because evolution has helped us create beneficial habits. Think about it, guys. Whenever you're gonna, when you tie your shoelaces, you've been doing that every day for as long as you have lived. You don't really think about which shoelaces you tie first on your right leg or your left leg. And every time I'm sure, unless you otherwise decide, you're going to tie one leg first, and you've done this all your life.
Sure.
This is an example of a habit which has formed, and it serves a huge purpose. I mean, every morning, if you're going to decide which shoelaces are you going to tie first, if you're going to decide, which side of the bed are you going to get out first, if you're going to decide, when are you, if so many things about your life are just automated, and that is the reason why our mind has so much bandwidth for the important tasks, right?
Sure. Sure.
So it's a very efficient way of managing effort. This whole habit thing is an evolutionary benefiting trait. Hence, the whenever you're wanting to change behavior, if you instead fixate yourself on changing the habit which dictates that behavior, that's going to be a more effortless way to in behavior change, rather than depending on your willpower every time, every day you want to change the behavior.
Yes, yes, I do get what you're saying. So this whole evolutionary science behind a habit, because we want so many of our things to be automated, we do not require to exercise our intellect, and that's why so many habits are already in place. But then that also has a flip side to it, doesn't it? That every time we need to glue ourselves to a fresh habit, it almost means that we need to unstick ourselves or unglue ourselves from a previous habit. So
Correct.
it's just the replacement or the substitution of an unhealthy habit with a healthy habit. And if evolution has for some reason kept an old habit in place, and if it has been around for years together, I mean, I'm relating to people who struggle with things like eating, which is actually an emotional habit, or people who struggle with alcoholism, or people who struggle with even overworking. So these are certain habits that have gotten ingrained for years together. And now, if this person wants to inculcate a fresh habit of work-life balance for a workaholic, or being a teetotaler for an alcoholic, then what does the science tell us? Does the science say that if the old habit has been around for say 20 years, then it would take at least 10% of the time, or 1% of the time, or how much time to move on and migrate to the fresh, healthier habit?
Yeah, yeah. So there are all kinds of studies. Some studies say 21 days, others say 66 days. However, I'll tell you a practical example about myself. I'm not too sure about how many days it takes. I think pretty sure you can't have a number for every habit. For example, changing something as basal as food is going to take far longer than changing something very superficial. Besides the point, the the method remains the same, Bhavin. I think what James Clear brings out very beautifully, and Charles Duhigg in his book, The Power of Habits, brings out very beautifully is, that there is a pattern of habit change. And we'll follow the James Clear method here. He believes that there are four stages of a habit.
Sure.
Every habit, good or bad, follows through this. First, there is a cue. Second, there is a craving. Third, there is a response. And fourth, there is a reward.
Sure.
This is called the habit loop. Every habit that you go through will and every habit that you want to inculcate, you're going to fit that habit into these four. So let me give you an example about my workout habit. Early in the morning, my phone buzzes with its alarm at around 5:10, 5:15. That's my cue, and that I have to get up. The second phase is craving. I want to build. I want to do something for my body, and I want to be fit. That's my craving. Uh, so third thing that I do is, just after getting up and brushing my teeth, I don't give myself a chance to think more. I just, wear my workout clothes, which I have kept the previous day, and just get out of my house with my workout shoes. That itself, that is the most difficult part of the entire exercise. This response part, and
Sure.
the response and the workout that follows is the most easy part. The most difficult part is just to get out of the house in the first 5 minutes of waking up, right?
Yes.
And once you get out, then you work out and you come back, and I have a small reward like a nice breakfast, which I crave towards, and that breakfast is my reward, you know. So
Yes.
this forms the whole habit loop: cue, craving, response, and reward. And for me, I had, to answer your questions about how many days, how long. For me, I had taken a very easy target. It is very important to take easy targets when you're starting off.
Sure.
What I had done is I had said to myself, I will just work out for 1 minute
Yes.
for 3 days.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's important because you don't want your mind to give you a reason not to follow through that behavior in the initial phases. Now,
Yes.
it's going to be extremely difficult for the laziest person to say no to 1 minute of exercise for 3 days.
Sure.
Yeah, and the moment you do those 3 days, of 1 minute of exercise, you increase it to 5 days, then you do 10 days, and soon I have seen that over the last 4 months I have not missed a single day of exercise, and most of these workouts are at least 30-35 minutes plus.
Oh, congratulations. You come a long way.
Yeah, but it didn't seem like a long way.
Yes, 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 yes. That's the beauty. So, as you were mentioning this, I realized, and even you highlighted that it is between the step two and the step three. So, well, setting up a queue doesn't seem to be difficult, and having a craving is a natural part of the whole human mechanism. And then setting up a reward and looking forward to the reward is again a very simple thing, but the crux of the game and all the deal breakers lie in that space between craving and response.
Yeah,
And that is, what I would like you to perhaps elaborate for our listeners is that is the gap which yet seems to be uh, somehow not necessarily addressed because I have also read James Clear, And that is one area which I feel has not necessarily been addressed sufficiently by the habit scientists.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because we will find the whole spectrum of people. You could manage to get yourself to work out because working out was relatively somewhere in the middle of your spectrum. Neither was it very easy. If it was very easy, you would have accomplished that routine before knowing this science. Nor was it perhaps that difficult, because if it is something very, very difficult, then again, to be able to negotiate a healthy response to the craving may not be possible. The other day I was asking you, how would you extrapolate this science? I have been endeavoring to intermittent fast in the last few months, and while I have been successful, I would say 80% of the time, but then there are those 20%, those occasions wherein I give in to I forget about the response of abstaining from food, and I give in to what I would call a relatively more basal craving of indulging in food in that moment.
Right.
So how do you suggest, how does one exactly, what are one's thought processes, and how does one navigate through that whole, and maybe we can, in line with your typical way of operation and thinking, well, let us take an extreme example, say an alcoholic who has who desires to abstain from alcohol and wants to form a habit, but all this entire four-step framework of cue, craving, response, and reward, all of that, the person would only fall flat on his face
Correct.
quite often. So
Correct.
how does one negotiate one's way through this
Right.
entire four-step framework in case of deeper aspects or deeper things that you detest or doing, or deeper things that you
Right.
wish to abstain from? Yes.
So, the both of the examples that you gave, Bhavin, about, trying to fast or, abstain from alcohol are actually examples of how to break a bad habit. These are, while food is not a bad habit, however, you're trying to abstain from it, so it falls under that category. And now, that kind of has its own pattern of cue, craving, response, and reward. So, for example, ask any alcoholic, there is a big chance that he would be drinking alcohol at a particular time, or with particular people, or at a particular occasion, or in a
Sure.
particular place, right? So,
Sure.
all of these four are the cues, you know. So let's take an example of your food, for example. Let's try to work there. The cue for any for your food response, as we had discussed earlier, is when somebody you said that you're able to resist the temptation for a long time. However, when the food passes in your living room for someone else, you feel it's difficult to resist that temptation, right?
Sure.
So that passing of that food, that seeing that food is the cue,
Yes.
which triggers a craving, and a craving is to eat that food. If the thought of satisfying yourself by eating that food, a response is actually eating that food, and reward is feeling satisfied after eating that food. Now,
Yes.
the rule of breaking the bad habits, Bhavin, is in the cue, make it invisible. Your best uh, ability to resist that eating during that fasting time is not to have that cue at all. Find some way wherein if food is being served to your family members during, let's say, a particular time, you lock yourself into a room, or you listen to some music, you substitute that with some other behavior, so that the cue is invisible for you.
So it is pretty interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but it
Yeah,
seems to be pretty interesting that the problem somehow doesn't lie between the craving and response. Perhaps because the gap between craving to response doesn't have enough of human will available, enough
correct,
volition for us to abstain.
correct.
So the wiser solution is to nip it in the bud and not let the cue itself appear, because anything after that is to a great extent beyond our capacity
Beyond
to
your
withhold.
control. And food
Yes.
especially is, fasting, and, triggers your survival response, I believe, as it's an evolutionary trait. These are things, where, your mind completely loses control over your behavior. And it's a very helpful evolutionary trait, because if it weren't around, you would have fasted yourself to death. I mean, some of your forefathers, and you won't be around. So, so this is an evolutionary trait which helped our ancestors survive and, eat whenever food was visible. So your best chance lies, whether it's alcohol, for an alcoholic, maybe not to keep alcohol at home at all. The other cues are not hanging out with friends who are alcoholics, not visit restaurants which serve alcohol. uh, in my personal case, I find it I make it a very interesting thing. What I do is, if I don't want to drink on a particular night with friends, I drive to the party. So that, and
Right.
I have a rule that I'm never on the wheel if I drink, and because I have to drive back, I don't drink. So,
Yes.
so
You're almost making it sound as if it almost appears that the whole science of habits is less about willpower or less about philosophy, and it is much more about common sense.
yes, yes.
Uh,
In fact,
as simple as that.
In fact,
Yes.
that's the whole debate, whether, a lot of philosophy really has helped in changing behavior. It helps people understand that the behavior is wrong. However, the success of in changing deeply ingrained behavior is very limited, at least in my personal opinion, when people just depend on philosophy and education to change behavior, because these are patterns, habit patterns, which have formed over the entire lifetime of an individual, and they require science, practical science, to actually deal with it. And
Sure.
while you might believe that only the Q part of the equation is tough, is important in my experience, all the four levels are equally important. In some habits, maybe Q is more important, for example, unless you have a very satisfying reward. In the initial phases of your habit, you're not going to change behavior. Uh, you know,
Yes.
so for example, if you uh, for an alcoholic, they give you, in Alcoholic Anonymous, they inject you with substances which help you develop an aversion to alcohol, and that is basically making the reward very unsatisfying, right? So
Yes.
sooner, soon the individual starts believing that the liquid that he consumes is not satisfying, and that helps him give up his behavior.
Right. So they began with a negative reward, so the old habit can be crumbled.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Very interesting. Yes. So I do get it that depending on case to case and habit to habit, any of these four out of this four step framework, any of the steps could be perhaps more important than the other steps, and you don't have a thumb rule as to which one is the most significant part of all the four.
Yeah, and just to get to our, usual, just to extrapolate, juxtapose this to our, topic at discussion, effortless prosperity, which is our overall theme of these podcasts. Uh,
Sure.
I have seen that habits play a very, 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 very important role in wealth creation. Just like it is difficult to change behavior in diet and weight loss and workouts, it's far more difficult to change people's financial behavior if they depend on willpower alone.
Would you like to elaborate that with some example?
Yeah, one of the biggest wealth creators for the general population over the years has been this systematic investment plan.
Yes.
And what that tries to do is the moment your salary or your income hits, business income hits your account, on a particular day, it debits your account and it puts that money into a mutual fund of your choice. And turns out that it's not actually, having the brilliance to really pick the right fund or the right markets or timing the markets better, which results in long-term wealth creation. It is just this, systematic habit of investing small sums of money over a long period of time, which has created wonders for most mutual fund investors.
Which almost goes to say that the moment the decision of allocating that money and letting that money out into a systematic investment plan was automated
Right.
rather than kept in the hands of the investor, a better future was created. So which almost goes to mean that the moment the intellect was taken out of the system and personal will was taken out of the system, and an automated habit or an unconscious habit was allowed its free course, that's when magic happened.
Yes, because you think about it, making an SIP is for 30 years every month is one decision, you know,
Yes,
while investing every month for 30 years is 360 is 30 multiplied by 12 is more than 3,600 decisions.
360 decisions.
360
Yes,
decisions. Yeah.
yes,
So,
yes,
it's going to be far more easy in taking that one decision and let system automate your behavior rather than every month sitting with your advisor and writing that check.
yes, yes. And that perhaps also signifies, this entire importance of rituals. People have lots of rituals around so many things in life. It could be either in terms of their daily religious rituals, or it could be about the family coming together to eat on a dining table every single day, twice a day, or it could be about taking your child or your grandparent to the garden. All of these seem to be very automated, unconscious habits, but these kind of things which don't involve the head, but when they are done day after day after day after day, they seem to yield something deeply significant in the human journey.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yes,
mean, your very basis of survival, which is breathing, is a thoughtless habit.
yes,
If imagine if you had to think about how much air you have to take with every breath and how long the breath should be, would you have the bandwidth to do anything else?
precisely. Yes, yes.
So
And that is perhaps also the reason why intellectual people quite often fail in life, and people who look like simpletons, they make it really big. Perhaps they do not allow their intellect to hamper the consistency, because an intellectual person is always going to be doing a yo-yo between multiple things. He would find one thing interesting one day and another thing more beneficial the next day and a third thing appealing on the third day, and he would eventually never end up digging deep enough to strike gold. Whereas a person who is perhaps less intelligent, but who allows his habits and who allows some meaningful rituals to guide his life rather than thinking about them every single time, what we call metacognition, when we think and then we think about our thoughts itself. So this perhaps makes it very obvious as to why some seemingly unintelligent looking people make it bigger in life compared to the intelligent looking ones who are confused and always hopping from one ritual or one habit to another.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, before I think summing up and summarizing the call, I will just give you a quick quote from Mark Twain in his usually witty style. So Mark Twain said, "Success just needs two things: confidence and ignorance." So this basically ties up to what you said. Sometimes it's not the smarts that you need, because smarts can also deviate you from your path. But a bit of bullheadedness into doing the same thing again and again and again is gonna make the journey easier. So
Wonderful.
should I move
Yes.
towards the summary, Bhavin?
Yeah, that would be awesome. Let us just put all the points together. Yes, I would love for you to do that.
Right. So we began by saying that willpower, depending on willpower for behavior change, is a really inefficient way of changing behavior. Uh, Changing habits is far more easier and far more effective in the long term. We also touched in that habits have a deeply evolutionary benefit. You don't want to be thinking, for example, about your breathing every day. Breathing as a habit is far easier than giving thought to it. So, habits have a evolutionary past and are very beneficial. We then moved on to discuss the science of habit change. It involves 4 steps: cue, craving, response, and reward. Uh, in this, we discussed that for many habits, cue is the most important parameter. I believe that all 4 of them are important for different habits. For some habits, rewards is an extremely important loop, at least in the beginning. We also spoke about the cycle for bad habits. For bad habits, it's important to not give in to the cue. For an alcoholic, it is about avoiding the company of alcoholic friends. For a guy who is fasting, it's avoiding the sight of food. That's a far easier way to do it rather than, testing your willpower again and again. We married this habit these habit learnings into effortless prosperity. We've learned how a few individuals who have, invested some periodic sums of money into high yielding assets like mutual funds have benefited because it's a single decision versus a lot many decisions, every month. Finally, Bhavin gave a brilliant analogy of how maybe just because of habits, a few average people are time and again able to do better than intelligent people who keep hopping on from one thing to another.
Yes, that sums it up pretty well, Vihan.
Sure, Bhavin.
Wonderful. And that I guess that makes for a very interesting podcast, because I'm sure within the cross section of our listeners, there are lots of people who do wish to break habits and inculcate fresh, meaningful habits. This is a wonderful start, I guess, and deep gratitude to the work of James Clear and Charles Duhigg for systematizing this whole science for so many of us to understand and internalize so as to jump into greater and greater aspects of an effortless life and effortless prosperity. Thank you so much, Vihan, for your valuable time today and your words of wisdom as always.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhavin. Thank you, everyone. I hope you pick up some good habits and give up some bad habits. Just one last word of caution while you're trying to change your habits. Just tackle one habit at a time. Just because you know the science, don't spread it too thin. Because in the beginning you need some willpower, which will only help you maybe change one or two behaviors at a time. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and I guess there's a pretty broad topic, so God willing, we might do a part two and a part three to this at a later point.
Okay, ciao.
Yes, Vihang. Okay, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.